how Dr. Eberl discusses freedom and predestination in the Skywalker family. So he starts off the essay by recalling the scene from The Phantom Menace, where Qui-Gon is saying in regard to Anakin, "He is the chosen one. You must see that." And then Yoda responds, "Clouded this boy's future is." He ends up taking us to the scene near the end of that original six-part saga, where the apparition of Obi-Wan tells Luke, "You cannot escape your destiny. You must face Darth Vader again." And Eberl says, "These scenes raise particularly interesting philosophical questions concerning freedom and moral responsibility." And header with that same quote from Yoda, "Clouded this boy's future is." And the idea here, as he starts off, the idea is that even though Qui-Gon thought he knew certain things about Anakin, and in fact the prophecy was technically accurate, but there was more uncertainty than he realized. And that's in a way kind of like how real life is too. The future is almost always kind of cloudy. But here's the question. Is the future truly, quote, indeterminate, undecided, quote, not set in stone? Or is it just kind of a point of view? And he says, "Some philosophers would answer that Anakin does not freely choose to throw the Emperor down the second Death Star's reactor shaft. They assume that the eternal observer's knowledge determines his fate. Whatever has been correctly prophesied must happen." But, Eberl points out, the film does seem to really highlight Anakin's moral choice as a choice that he made at that particular moment. So how can we preserve free will? He suggests that one option would be what he calls countertemporal causality, the idea that a future choice causes past knowledge, whereas we typically think of past events causing future events. The Emperor kind of wants to be some kind of puppet master, and he actually has a tremendous amount of control and influence, but in the end, he can only go so far because the free will of individuals, such as Anakin, were really outside his control. He cites a number of Star Wars references where people use the phrase "the will of the Force" almost as something that's kind of determining people's fates, so the opposite of libertarian free will. And then he cites Han Solo as an exception when Han says, "No mystical energy field controls my destiny." And then Leia later says to Luke, "He's got to follow his own path. No one can choose it for him." John Locke's story of the man who willingly remains in a locked room that he couldn't escape if he wanted to because it's locked. So the idea of free will without compulsion, it really is his choice, but it's still without true possibility of him doing otherwise. Freedom, then, may ultimately depend upon a person's will, whether he desires to do one action or another, whether he desires to do good or evil, and his ability to do whatever he wills. He shows how the various steps in Anakin gradually becoming Darth Vader can be thought of as the outworking of what Augustine would call inordinate desires. He points out, even if something prevents Anakin from, say, marrying Padme on Naboo, imagine their ship blows up on the way there, he has already freely willed to violate the Jedi Code and is morally responsible for that volition. So despite the appearance that Anakin has no alternative possibilities with regards to being the chosen one and destroying the Emperor, he's nonetheless free in choosing to ally himself with the dark side, because that choice stems from his own will, his own inordinate desires. So Eberl explains that throughout the saga, many different characters make an effort to try to influence Luke's will by making use of his desires, but, quote, ultimately only Luke can turn his own will to the dark side. After all, as Augustine says, what cause of the will could there be except the will itself? We are radically free and thus responsible for what we choose to will. And then he says, "And since my wife is still out with the girls, I think I'll exercise my radical freedom to watch Attack of the Clones and wake up the neighbors, comfortable in the knowledge that que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be." That's how the chapter ends. So what are my thoughts about the chapter? Well, I think that this